What's up guys? On today's episode, I'm going to show you how to change a front wheel bearing on your 8th generation Honda Civic. I went ahead and lifted the car up, pulled the wheel off. If you guys are doing this on your own and you don't have impact tools, you're going to want to remove the axle nut first. So get somebody inside the car for you to hold the brakes, and then you'll be able to take this off with a large breaker bar. There is a dimple here in the threads that you may be able to pound back out. It might help you out a little bit. You may need a chisel to do that, but I'm just going to use an impact on it. It's a 32mm socket. You want to make sure once you get that nut off that you can push the CV shaft in. Most people can't do it with their fingers like I just did, but you can use, again, put a punch in the end, smack the end with a hammer, and basically get that CV shaft free out of the hub. I got lucky and my rotor screws will come right out. If yours are stuck, you're probably going to need one of these impact driver tools. Put the end in the screw, smack the end with a hammer, and it rotates as you hit it. And usually it'll get those screws out for you. If not, throw a little bit of heat on them with a propane torch or MAPP gas torch, whatever you have laying around. And that usually, between the impact driver and a little bit of heat, usually isn't too much of a problem getting those out. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the brake caliper and the bracket in one piece and just hang it up here on the strut. Now the caliper's off. Should be able to take the rotor off. That'll get you to the hub. Also, don't forget to remove the wheel speed sensor. But if your car is as rusty as this one is, chances are you're gonna break it trying to get it out. So just be prepared and have one on hand, because chances of you getting that out when the car's this rusty is very slim. All right, so to be able to get the hub off the car, I have to get the CV shaft out of the center of the hub. So I can't push the CV shaft any further toward the transmission. So my only alternative at this point is to take the 2 bolts out of the strut and move the whole knuckle assembly down. And then that should give me enough room that I can push the shaft toward the center of the vehicle, pull the shaft out of the way, and then I'll put the 2 bolts back in the strut. And then that'll give me a nice stable place to actually work on this hub. All right, the 2 strut bolts, the nut is a 19mm. The actual bolt itself is a 17. This caliper around to the other side so I don't screw up the hose. Not sure if you guys can hear this or not, but when this thing was making right-hand turns, all the weight would shift to the left-hand side of the car and you could hear this bearing start to growl. But it had play in it, and it was definitely growling on the driver's side front, so. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and throw these bolts back in real quick. Pull the CV shaft out of the way, hopefully. There we go. Put that back in. Turn that back on. All right, so now that I've got everything disassembled, now I'm actually gonna start working on the hub, which is, for all intents and purposes, the hard part. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna attach the hub puller to the hub itself. I'm gonna attach the hub puller then to a slide hammer. So I'm gonna then slide hammer the hub out of the bearing because the hub is actually press fit into the bearing. All right, so before you start beating on this thing, make sure everything's nice and tight because it's gonna flop around on you. That is exactly why I moved my toolbox, because I knew this thing was gonna come flying out of here. So as you can see, the race came out with it. That's super common. If you didn't buy a new hub, you can cut that race off, but this lady's going on a road trip with this thing tomorrow, and I bought one just because I didn't want any hiccups. So I'm gonna go ahead and put a whole new hub on it, but I'm gonna keep this one for the future because more than likely she's gonna need one for the other side. So I'll cut this off at some point in the future, use a gear puller or whatever you have to pull this off if you don't have a new hub. So after you get the hub pulled off, you've got this snap ring that you have to remove to be able to press the bearing out of the knuckle. If yours is anything like mine, it's pretty rusty, pretty crusty, kind of a pain to get out, but probably the best thing you can do is get a punch and a hammer or an air chisel or whatever you have handy, and basically just try to rattle this thing in the groove, hit it with some penetrating oil, basically do what you need to do to get this snap ring out of here. It's some of these I'm sure can be quite a pain, but that's just going to depend on what kind of shape the car you're working on is in. Basically, after a while, I got tired of swinging the hammer and pulled out the air hammer. But as you saw, or maybe you didn't see because my back might have been in the way, but this snap ring started spinning. So there she goes. It's moving. That's more than what I had before. There we go. Well, that's half. More than what I had before. Let's see if I can get behind this thing and just start working it. She's gonna go flying. I was just waiting for it to hit me in the face. This is why you just spend the extra money up front and buy a new snap ring. You don't even screw with it. This one I could probably clean up on the wire wheel and reuse it, but at this point, what for? I have a new one. All right, so over here at the bench, you want to go ahead and get your press tool assembled. So you need to pick the right disc sizes to be able to, this is going to push the bearing into this cup on the front side. So this is gonna go on the back side, this would be on the transmission side, and this is gonna basically just pull forward and push the bearing into this cup. So you need to select a cup that is larger than the diameter of the bearing. Make sure it sits correctly on the knuckle itself. So basically when the tool is assembled, it's gonna look something like this. The bearing in the knuckle is gonna end up in this part. You hold this, tighten this nut with an impact, it pulls this plate forward, pushes the bearing out of the knuckle and into the cup. So now you got everything apart. Spend a little bit of time in here, just clean up the snap ring groove, clean up the rust out of the back edge where that bearing is going to seat up against. Basically just make sure everything's cleaned out before you go pressing this new bearing in here. All right, so before you go pressing this bearing in any old direction, it actually does make a difference what side goes to what side. The back side is actually smooth and it's magnetic. It has a very, very slight magnetic draw to it. The front side that goes out has a traditional like lip seal on it. It doesn't look quite as smooth. But the easiest way to tell is just hold it against something magnetic. That one would go toward the inside of the vehicle. The procedure for pushing this in is basically just gonna be flip-flop. So the large cup is gonna go on the inside, and then the flat piece, or the flat cup, whatever you wanna call it, is gonna go on the outside, and then you're just gonna push it in and draw it in with an impact gun. You can use a crescent wrench, ratchets, whatever you have on hand, but if you have impact tools, you're gonna use them. Make sure when you guys are using this tool, put plenty of anti-seize or grease or something on the threads, otherwise you're just gonna go up the threads and destroy the bolt. That's it, stop spinning. All right, let's see if it's in there far enough. Otherwise, I gotta put that cup on. So everybody says, looks good. Try to keep it from rusting up. We'll see. All right, so at this point, we're ready to put the hub back in the bearing. You can reuse the old one like I told you earlier, but you gotta cut the race off of it. Like I said, I'm in a time crunch here, so I just bought a whole new hub and gonna stick it in. So what I'm doing is basically the back side, I have a cup on this inner race, holding the inner race in place, so when I press the hub into the inner race, it doesn't blow the inner race out the back side. All right, well, I hate to be that guy, but installation is pretty much reversal of removal. So let me unbungee cord my CV shaft. Back down, pull my bungee cord out, pull the 2 bolts for the knuckle, get that CV shaft back in place, and I've got a new nut for that. Now the tool works really, really well. The only real problem with it is, like I said, you have to grease the threads on it. Well, anti-seize, you know, works well, obviously. You can use grease or whatever you want to use, but it really doesn't matter what you put on it. As soon as you pick up that tool and that threaded bolt and stuff, it just gets all over your hands, all over the adapters, and like everything you're working on is just covered in a thin layer of anti-seize. So it's not perfect, but you know what? It's a hell of a lot easier than taking the entire spindle out of the vehicle. So after you guys get your axle nut torqued back down and the dimple put back in the axle nut, you can go ahead and put the wheel and tire back on the car and take it for a ride. One thing worth mentioning real quick is the SI version of the Honda Civic has a different bearing assembly and a different torque spec to it. So if you have an SI, the parts are different. The torque specs are different than what's listed in the video, but I'll put a chart or a link to a chart down in the description for you guys that'll list basically every torque spec on a Honda Civic that you would ever need to know. As far as the tools, I'll have links in the description to the tools and the parts I used in the video. The other thing is with the tools, you may be able to rent this stuff locally. So if you guys aren't aware, most local auto parts stores will rent tools. So basically what you do is you put, like, let's say 50 bucks down on this press tool, you use it, and then you get your 50 bucks back when you bring the tool back. So if you guys want to go that route, you can, but for those of you that actually want to look into buying the tools, I'll have them down in the description for you. With that said, if you guys like the video, hit like. If you want to see more content, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.